RFA, the solicitation itself. We'll go through application requirements, qualifications, have some time for question and answer towards the end, and then we'll also review some of the frequently asked questions that we've received so far. With me today is my co-host, Jeff Rasmussen. He'll be kind of running the show behind the scenes. Want to let folks know we have turned off the chat and are going to direct folks to the Q&A if they have questions. We won't be able to respond to them live in the moment as we have done in the past with some of our webinars, but we will be taking those questions and putting them into the Q&A document, responding to those, and then posting that Q&A document early next week. And we'll send out a notification to everyone once that document is posted. So again, just want to remind folks to, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A. We'll also have some time at the end if anyone feels comfortable, or if folks feel comfortable coming off of mute and asking their questions. They can ask questions in that way as well. Let me get started here. So this is a program through the Department of Commerce. Commerce provides a wide array of support focusing on community and economic development. We work with local governments, tribes, businesses, and civic leaders throughout the state of Washington to strengthen communities throughout the state of Washington. Our agenda today, we will go over the Clean Buildings Performance Grants application overview. We'll review the Clean Buildings Performance Grants evaluation and scoring, have some links to resources, as well as some common questions, and then we'll have time there at the end for any questions and comments. So jumping into the application overview, the purpose and background of this funding, this funding was enabled by engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5949 as amended by the House in Section 1029. It authorizes $25 million for Tier 1 covered buildings as defined in RCW 1927A 200, and Commerce has reserved this portion of the funding for privately held Tier 1 buildings, including nonprofit organizations pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Additionally, engrossed substitute Senate Bill 5949 authorized $15,427,000 for public buildings. This portion of funding is open to local governments, municipalities, port and hospital districts, public higher education institutions, school districts, federally recognized tribal governments, and state agencies pursuing compliance for Tier 1 and Tier 2 buildings. Just a brief reminder, Tier 1 buildings are buildings which are larger than 50,000 square feet. And then Tier 2 buildings are between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet. And then multifamily buildings, which are larger than 20,000 square feet. The objectives of the Clean Buildings Performance Grant is to support compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. As compliance will be different from one building to the next, Commerce identified kind of two basic scopes of work just to kind of try and provide a bit of framework for applicants. Those two basic scopes of work kind of fall into the building retrofit projects. So those would be retrofits or renovations intended to reduce a building's energy use intensity. And then the second kind of basic scope of work would be contracted service projects. And those are more geared towards reporting and documentation, kind of things that aren't necessarily retrofits or renovations to a building. Funding allocation priorities include buildings with earlier compliance dates, as well as those who may face penalties without immediate support. Additional priorities will consider the resulting amount of energy saved and the ability to finish the project within the period of performance, as well as considerations for geographic equity and availability of accelerator program support. Moving into the minimum qualifications for applications, organization must be licensed to do business in the state of Washington. The must be a privately owned Tier 1 building pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, or a publicly owned Tier 1 or Tier 2 building pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Publicly owned, we've identified local governments, municipalities, port and hospital districts, public higher education institutions, school districts, and federally recognized tribal governments and state agencies. Where a building owner feels that they are publicly owned, if they're not on that list, we are open to reviewing any documentation building owners feel identifies them as being as the building being publicly owned. The applicant must either own the facilities proposed for the project or hold a lease that extends beyond the time of the expected life of the proposed project. And then minimum qualifications for proposed projects. All portions of the project must be directly related to pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. It doesn't mean that the project must bring the building into compliance, as again, all of these projects are going to look different from one building to the next, and building owners are going to be in different stages of their compliance pursuit, but the project must be directly related to pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Commerce has budgeted the amounts that we spoke on earlier. There is 24,250,000 for Tier 1 privately held buildings and 14,946,190 for Tier 1 and Tier 2 publicly owned buildings. This amount, it's a lesser amount than it's referenced earlier, represents the deduction of 3% of administrative costs as approved by the Office of Financial Management. Applications in excess of $2 million will be rejected as non-responsive and will not be evaluated. There will be no minimum application amount, and applicants can combine multiple scopes of work into a single application with a combined amount not exceeding $2 million. There are no match requirements associated with these funds. This funding cannot supplant or replace funds already committed to a project. Commerce will not fund projects beyond 100% of the total project costs. Similar supports, such as accelerators, incentives, or grant programs that apply to the project, which are offered by local municipalities or utilities, for example, must be considered before those costs can be included in an application. In the event that any additional funding becomes available, any contract awarded may be amended to provide for additional related services, but additional funding is not guaranteed. And any contracts awarded as a result of this RFA is contingent upon the availability of funding. We'll kind of get into some more of the timeline and period of performance in the when we get into the questions as well. There have been a lot of questions around that. The period of performance of any contracts resulting from this RFA is scheduled to begin upon contract execution and end June 30th, 2025. Pending legislative approval, this funding may be appropriated to extend the contract date. Commerce reserves the option at its sole discretion to extend the contract for 2 additional one-year periods. Extensions and/or additional funding are not guaranteed. The estimated timeline of procurement activities. We issued the RFA back on December 16th. We are currently in our second of the two applicants conferences. We will keep the question and answer period open through January 23rd, and then applications are due January 30th, 2025 by 3 p.m. or at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The evaluation will run from February 3rd to February 18th. If needed, we will conduct virtual presentations with finalists if required. And then we intend to announce apparent successful applicants and send notification via email to unsuccessful applicants on or about February 24th, 2025. We have the debriefing conference period. If debriefs are requested, that will run from February 26th through March 12th. At that time, we will also be negotiating contracts for apparently successful applicants. Again, that's February 26th through March 12th. But the earliest date a contract may be signed would be March 12th, 2025. Submission of responses will be submitted by email to the Clean Buildings Performance Grants email. Applications must be received by the RFA coordinator no later than 3 p.m. Pacific time on January 30th, 2025. Applications must be submitted electronically as an attachment to the RFA coordinator to the email address listed in section 2.1. That's the cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov. Attachments to the email shall be in Microsoft Word or PDF. Zipped files cannot be received by Commerce, cannot be used for submission of applications. And thank you, Jeff. And Commerce does not assume responsibility for problems with non-Commerce email. If Commerce email is not working, appropriate allowances will be made. Yeah, so we will get into the response contents. There we go. The electric response must contain Exhibit A, B, C, and D. The applications must be written in English and submitted electronically to the RFA coordinator. Applications must provide information in the same order as presented in this document with the same headings. This will not only be helpful for evaluators of the application, but should also assist in the applicant in preparing a thorough response. All items marked mandatory, again, that's Exhibit A, B, C, and D, must be included as part of the application for the application to be considered responsive. The items marked mandatory must be included, but they are not scored. The items marked scored are those awarded points and evaluated for the application. Moving into the evaluation and scoring of the applications, there are a handful of application questions and that comprises 80% of the application scoring. The first section is related to compliance, how the project relates to compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. That comprises 60% of the application score. And then there are some program management questions, which comprise 20% of the application score. We then go into the scope of work and the budget, which each comprise 10% of the score respectively. The scope of work must align with the compliance plan and must align with the budget. And if an energy audit has been done and is being used to describe the scope of work, to justify a scope of work, must align with that energy audit. The scope of work must also demonstrate that the project can be completed within the period of performance. This is a really tight turnaround with these funds, so it really is a priority for us to kind of call that out for folks to ensure that they are well aware, as we are, of just how quickly these funds need to be turned around and this program needs to be implemented. The budget, also comprising 10%, will be evaluated for relevance to the project and by supporting documentation like engineering studies, quotes, red line drawings, cut sheets, if available. Yeah. Moving on to some resources for the for applicants. We have our Clean Buildings Performance Grants funding webpage, which is there. That has the RFA itself in PDF. It has Word document, which has all of the application materials, all of the exhibits A, B, C, and D. We also have a link. That is where we post the question and answer document when that has been updated. Again, we'll get another one posted here early next week once we receive questions from you folks today. We have our email if you have any questions that pop up for you while you are considering your application, cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov. Again, that's where the application should be sent once they are finalized. And then as kind of general reference, since these are related to compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, want to be sure that folks are well aware of the resources that we have available as building owners are pursuing compliance with the standard to be able to access those resources as they come available or as they are available. Okay, that was just kind of moving quickly through the application itself and some resources. So wanted to jump into some common questions which have been coming up from a lot of folks in these initial stages. Tier 2 performance-based applications. A lot of folks have been asking if Tier 2, if a performance-based application for a Tier 2 building would be eligible. Those would not be eligible as Tier 2 buildings do not have a performance requirement to meet. They don't have to meet any UIT in order to comply with the standard. So performance-based applications of a Tier 2 building would not be eligible. Additionally, the legislation did not identify Tier 2 privately owned buildings as eligible through this funding. So Tier 2 privately owned buildings are not eligible. A lot of folks have asked questions about supplantation, since lots of projects will be in various stages of, beginning and end, and whether they're finished or in action. We wanted to be sure that, folks know they cannot supplant funds. So if they have funds already committed to a portion of a project, they cannot use these funds from this grant to then replace those funds to pay for something else. New construction, standalone projects are not eligible through this funding. Sometimes with retrofitting projects, renovation projects, new construction such as concrete pad or housing for equipment may be needed. In those instances, that would be eligible, but that is as it relates to compliance with the standard. Completely new construction, standalone construction projects are not eligible. Some folks have asked about campus compliance. The campus compliance for those folks pursuing campus compliance, they would be eligible to apply for the funds, but the application must be related to specific building or buildings as they're going through that application. If folks would like more clarity on that, I would encourage them to reach out via email. The folks have also asked that are pursuing the investment criteria pathway, have asked about the cost effectiveness, how these types of grants may impact the cost effectiveness of um, uh, energy efficiency measures, which had been deemed non-cost effective. So if an energy efficiency measure has been deemed non-cost effective, it could still generally be eligible to for an application where these additional sets of funds would then make a non-cost effective measure cost effective. Again, if folks have more questions, I encourage them to reach out. Project timelines and period of performance. An overall project can be in process. If it's a bigger project, that's had started a while ago, it's gonna end in a while. An overall project can be in process, but the relevant portion of the project or the scope of work must take place during this period of performance. A lot of folks have asked about partial awards or ineligible activities. That would be addressed on a case-by-case basis at the time of contract negotiation of apparently successful applicants. So if an application is apparently successful, we would then enter contract negotiations, identify any ineligible costs, or anything that may not be able to fit within that time, the period of performance, and those costs would then not be included in the contract before it goes out for signature. Some folks have asked about the number of applications which can be submitted. Building owners can submit one application which has multiple scopes of work that is not to exceed that maximum amount of $2 million. So, if you have 5 eligible buildings and 5 eligible projects, that should be one application, 5 separate scopes of work, with not to exceed 2 million in total. Those are the most common questions which have come up for us during the Q&A period so far. So we can move into questions from folks which have come up in the Q&A today. So Jeff, if you wouldn't mind helping me out, we can read some of those. And then if anybody wanted to come off of mute, they are also encouraged to put up a hand, and we can do our best to give a response.
Yeah, we've got a handful of questions in here, Derek, and so I'm going to jump in with one quick one. I saw a hand just come up. So, Jen, let me get this first one, and then I'll come over to you. Derek, someone is asking if REITs, REITs, are able to utilize this program.
I'm not sure what that is in reference to.
I was hoping you had the answer to that one too.
Yeah, this is Tia hopping on from Kilroy Realty. It's a real estate investment trust.
Mm-hmm.
I know there are some differences with the way we handle taxes and stuff like that. So I was just wondering if we are able to utilize a grant.
I mean, it would be more towards the a specific building. If a a privately owned tier 1 building, pursuing compliance with the standard, that ownership structure is not the eligibility requirement that we would be looking for. Does that make sense?
Yes. So it sounds like we can if it's for a specific building.
Yeah, a specific building pursuing compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard.
Got it. And then while I'm on, I'm not understanding the project timeline and performance periods. So does that have to be early on, one of those dates that was, I think, ending early this year? Or could we set up a project that takes place later in the year or even next year?
Yeah, the costs would need to be incurred during the period of performance, which is which would be at the time of contract signature, which will be on or about March 12th, and then they need to be expended by June 30th of 2025. So it's like 3 months that
Okay.
the funds need to be expended.
Okay.
And that was in the legislation itself. There were some timeline limitations specific to this grant program. So we are doing our best to get those funds out there and spent as best we can.
Okay. Got it.
All right. So Derek, we have a few hands up, and
Yeah.
so I'm gonna move to these questions here real quick, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. So let's start with Jen.
Thank you. Sure. Can you define better what is a performance-based application of a tier 2 building?
Yeah, so that would be related to lowering the energy use intensity of the building. So like a retrofit or a renovation of a tier 2 building. As there is no performance metric for tier 2 buildings to comply with the standard, a renovation or retrofit based project for a tier 2 building would not be eligible.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, Dean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at the application questions, and one about the building is, has it ever received energy efficient based grants from Commerce?
Mm-hmm.
This building did rely on a community, a building communities grant
Mm-hmm.
that did have lead requirements to it. So there's a relationship, but does a building communities grant qualify as an energy efficient based grant from Commerce?
If it was intended to address energy efficiency within the building, then, we would consider that an energy efficiency based grant from Commerce. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it really wasn't about energy efficiency. I think the LEED program itself is about accessing energy efficient materials to putting up the building, not about the performance of the building itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if it was not related to, the performance of the building, if it was not a specific, we're getting this funding to improve the energy efficiency of the building, that would not be considered an energy efficiency based application from Commerce or grant from Commerce.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dean. Hey, Terry.
Hey, thanks. Hey, just to clarify, if we have a signed contract for an approved project at the time of application, did I understand it correctly that the projects would have to be done by June 30th?
The project itself does not need to be done by June 30th. The activities which are defined in the contract would need to be done by the 30th. So the project itself doesn't need to be finished. But any activities related to that project, which this grant would fund, need to take place and happen before June 30th, 2025.
What do you mean by activities?
If a project is going to extend beyond, June 30th, 2025, then any activities, any actions or any deliverables which would be identified in contract negotiation would need to be finished by June 30th, 2025.
Got it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Terry. Hi, Emily.
Hey, thank you. Kind of tucking into what Terry was asking there. And I wasn't sure if it would get answered through his question, but you know, if the funds are kind of earmarked, like that, like the project has been considered and we would like to move forward with it. You know, maybe the owner is trying to figure out where they can get this money from. They might be able to come up with it on them. So essentially they've kind of earmarked their own funds, but they're not exactly sure they can do that. Does that count as earmarked funds, you know, that you can't supplant? I'm just a little unsure what that cannot supplant earmarked funds or you know?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, in supplantation, it's going to be defined differently by different people, and different organizations have different budget processes. So it's really hard to give like a clear, specific like example of you know, this is supplantation, this is not supplantation. Generally, you know, if funds have been committed to a portion of a project, these application funds, these grant funds cannot replace those funds. You know, so whether that, you know, and again, it's going to be different from, you know, organization to organization as far as how that is determined, how those budgets are determined, and how those funds are allocated and appropriated from organization to organization. But the long and short of it, you know, these funds cannot be used to replace funds which have already been committed to a project. It's just it's beyond that. It's just it's hard to get, you know, into specifics to answer those questions. Yeah, I hope that helps.
It was helpful. I think my client is listening on this call as well, and so they would be able to take that for how they you know, set up their funds. So
Yeah.
that was helpful, and hopefully we can understand that and get to the bottom of it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, Ashley.
Hello, thanks for taking my question. I'm also piggybacking off Terry's question because mine wasn't quite answered. But if we were doing a boiler electrification or conversion to a heat pump system, and we could only accomplish, say, the architecture and engineering portion of the project, like everything we would need to go out to bid, the design, etc., during the performance period, is that acceptable, even though the new system would not be installed?
Yes, that would be an eligible application.
Eligible? Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, Joe.
Hi. So I heard that there's no performance-based application for tier 2 because there's no EUIT, correct?
Correct.
But the whole program is centered around reducing EUIs. So what other kind of application could you make for a tier 2 building?
Well, tier 2 buildings are required to benchmark. They are required to develop an energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program. That is how a tier 2 building comes into compliance. So an application related directly to those activities would be an eligible application for tier 2 buildings. You know, I would also say that you know, we can't know every building owner's need for compliance, or what they may need in order to even start those types of projects and those types of reportings. You know, so an application which would bring an organization, if an organization has certain needs in order to address those compliance requirements, you know, those would be eligible applications as well. It's just, as there is no performance metric required for tier 2 buildings at this point, performance-based projects of tier 2 buildings are not eligible for this funding.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, Jen.
Hi. So just piggybacking on what you just said. So on the request for applications, it looks like tier 2 buildings are only eligible for number 2, one under objectives 1.2. It would be, instead of the retrofit, it would be eligible for the contracted service projects section, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great questions. Oh, excellent. Good afternoon, Mike. Oh. Let's
There we
see.
go. I think we're good.
There we
Can you
go.
hear me?
Yeah.
we
Sorry
got
about that. Yeah, thanks for taking my questions. I appreciate it. I've got a few. I'll try to talk quick and hopefully we can get simple answers. I'm the Director of Facilities, Operations, and Security for the SQUIM School District.
Mhm.
And we've got a couple of campuses, without belaying this, that are California campus architecture. So I've got a high school that's essentially 7 different buildings plus a couple of portables. The challenge that we're working with here is we're going for a bond here in the very near future. And we're trying to determine how much, well, first of all, should we apply for grants associated with these particular campuses that we're looking to replace? Number one, with the chance that we might have to give the money back or unfortunately chew up part of our $2 million worth of requests. And number two, well, I should stick with that first. So that's one of my challenges. Number one, the high school aggregate, if you look at OSPI's aggregate, it's 130,000 square feet. Well, that's spread across 7 different buildings. And only one of those buildings meets the standard of even tier 2. And that's in OSPI looks at things as instructional space. Does the Department of Commerce care, number one, if it's instructional space or not? I think it's a yes or no.
Well, it would, I mean, that depends. That would be a compliance based question, which is kind of outside this specific funding. I mean, it relates to it, but it's a bit more nuanced. There's a lot of nuance within the standard itself.
I was afraid of that answer, actually, because we're trying to get our heads around it ourselves. Anyway, so the basic question is, do I consider a quote unquote building as a monolithic building or a campus?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of different ways to define a building, which we have found. The building itself, I mean, I would look at the thermal envelope of the building, you know, where it's its own self-contained building. There's a lot of different definitions of how we define buildings. You know, I might encourage you to reach out to our Clean Buildings staff to possibly help through some of these questions.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, our challenge here is our campuses are 60 plus years old, so
right.
Building envelope is going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
So okay.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
You can, well, our Clean Buildings email is buildings@commerce.wa.gov. If you'd like more of a conversation so you could describe your scenario, we can kind of walk through options for compliance and if that's going to help with applying for this grant.
Oh, that's really helpful. So it's buildings@commerce.wa.gov. Okay, the whole word.
Yeah.
And
all right.
I just put it in the chat for you, Mike, and then also made myself a note to loop back with you on this, on the compliance piece.
All right. Sorry, I want to make these 2 questions. Nope, just one now. Is there still a demolish exemption included in the Clean Buildings Act, and would that apply to this application?
I'm not sure about the specific the demolish portion.
So another question for the buildings group. Fair enough. I think that's it. I think these nuances you're talking about are probably better fielded by buildings. So I appreciate you taking my questions. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. And Mike, and I encourage you to reach out once you get some more clarification from the team. Encourage you to reach out and see if there would be any eligible portions that we can address with an application.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Great question so far. Let's see, Jessica, welcome.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So this is also regarding the contracted services portion of the RFA. So we have we're the applicant is a tier 1 building that has their own LLC and does not technically have any the LLC does not technically have any employees, but they contract services with a company that provides management, engineering, and sustainability and compliance services. Can the grant application be for a specific scope of work within that contract that addresses clean buildings compliance?
For the building that they own?
Yeah, so the ownership structure is we've got one big company that contracts with a bunch of LLCs that they've put together to own the LLCs own the buildings.
Mm-hmm. But it is a single own. It can get very complicated. So I mean, who owns the buildings, like the building in question, I think would be.
Oh, I get to pick one. So
And it doesn't have to be specific, but I think that's that's what would be the who is going to be responsible for coming into compliance with the standard. Is it going to be these smaller LLCs each individually, or would the larger LLC be responsible for coming into compliance with the standard, and how is the company approaching compliance with the standard? Are they doing it, as a single entity, or are they, kind of portioning that out between the LLCs?
I guess so. Then what would constitute contracted services? To sort of broaden the question a little bit. If there is a specific portion of a contract that addresses clean buildings compliance, and there's specific money set aside for that in the contract, would those constitute contracted services, even if the person or the people who are performing the work for the sort of parent company?
Oh, gotcha. I think I'll respond to this one in the Q&A, which we get posted, and then circle back around. I want to read back through the RFA with a little bit more intention and give some more specific clarity.
Awesome, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Corey, go ahead.
Hi, how do you define a campus?
Yeah, that's another one of those really fun ones that we've been working with in the standard. A campus generally is a collection of buildings, but perhaps on a Lynn, I don't know if you're on, if you have a better way to help me define campus as we do for the standard. Doesn't look like Annalyn is still on.
I guess my question, if this helps, is if I have 4 buildings, they all share a parking lot, they're all, they're a campus in our eyes.
Gotcha.
And they're all under 50,000 square feet, but total together, they're well over 100,000 square feet. Could that be considered a tier 1 campus? If we're doing a project to all of them?
Gotcha. As it's described, I don't believe those, are they connected at all?
No.
No. And are they metered separately?
Yes.
Yeah, then I mean they would be, for the intents of the Clean Building Performance Standard, those would be separate buildings.
Okay, and then
Yeah.
my second question was, we do have a tier 1 building that's undergoing some work. But I saw your comment on the privately owned tier
Mhm.
1, or I guess is it privately owned tier 2 doesn't apply, but privately owned tier 1 does?
Correct. Yeah, the funding is
Okay.
available, yeah, for privately owned tier 1 buildings only. Tier 2, privately owned tier 2 buildings are not eligible for the funding.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could I ask a quick question, piggybacking off what Corey just asked?
Mm-hmm.
If two buildings are connected by a walkway bridge, is that considered one building or two?
There are, Dylan, I see that you're on. Do you have some clarity on that?
Since that is one singular thermal envelope, that would be one building complex.
That's one thermal envelope. Even the walkway being
So if they're
an
connected
exterior
by,
walkway.
if they're connected by conditioned spaces, those would
Okay,
be.
so but if it's connected by an exterior walkway, that's two buildings.
Well, sorry, you said exterior. My apologies. No, that would be two different buildings.
Beautiful.
So
Thank you.
septic.
Thanks, Dylan.
Yeah. And Derek, I am taking a couple notes here on some of these compliance related questions and happy to loop with our tech team afterwards as well. So
awesome. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. So let's see, Kelsey, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my question. I have a very quick question regarding the application itself. Do we need a purchase order or signed contract just for the application before January 30th? Is that part of the requirement? Okay.
No, that is not needed.
Good to know. Thank you. Second question, we have very limited funding for this grant and we have so many applicants. Like, how do you determine who's getting it if everyone is, like, say, qualified? How do you determine that?
Yeah, that's all in the evaluation and scoring. You know, it's laid out there.
Okay.
In the instant, that's in general, that's how, you know, the applications are scored. In the instance that there are, you know, we get to the point where we have more applications than we have funding available, then the evaluation committee will get together and we will make determinations at those, comparing as best we can those applications which are you know, not clearly you know, at the score, who do not clearly score at the top of the review. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Excellent. All right. Let's see. Robert Linehan, good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my question as well. Two quick ones. I saw on the slide that said it's something about an audit. Is a audit required for this work? And then secondly, we are pursuing compliance via Connected Campus, and our EUI does appear to be under target. Does that have an impact on any grant solicitations?
Yeah, so an audit is not required to apply for the funding or submit an application. However, if folks do have an audit, you know, they can use that to justify a scope of work or to reference that in a scope of work. As far as buildings or campuses which are already performing under their EUIT, their energy use intensity target, they would generally be considered in compliance. So, you know, they don't need to implement any energy efficiency measures in order to come into compliance. So a performance-based application for a building which is already performing at or below its EUIT would generally not be eligible.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So, all right. And let's see, Abby, hello.
Hello, thank you for taking my question. I wanted to kind of piggyback on the discussion I think Emily brought up with one topic of like supplantation and then just the timeline for activities being completed. So for context, I have a large building. That's a tier 1 building. That's, more than double its target EUI. So there's a long planning process and kind of phased implementation of EEMs over the next couple of years to get it into compliance by 2028. So my question is, like, we have scope that is planned that could be completed by June of 2025. However, that has already been budgeted for, but there is the remaining $15 million worth of work that needs to be funded. So in the topic of subplantation, what I would like to apply for is one, the architecture and engineering to plan the rest of the EEMs. However, is that something you've encountered where it's like we have this budget that we're trying to accomplish all of these different EEMs over a phased implementation plan, and we'd like to move around the budget to be able to help future EEMs get implemented? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, and that's kind of, that would be an example, of, the activity has already been identified as part of a budget. Like the funds have already been identified of it sounds to me of what is going to pay, for that specific item. So, in this instance, these funds would not be eligible to replace those funds. In this instance, as I heard that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess my kind of general question is, like, in order to get work completed by that date, like lead times don't align with this timeline at all. So the activities that could be eligible for the completion date are already funded.
Yeah.
However, I did see in the RFA that there could be a request for an extension for the completion date. Is that something that you feel like is would detract from the application if you could not get the activities completed by June 30th?
That will be up to the reviewers, how they score that. Wanted to be sure, the RFA highlighted that item, being that the turnaround is so quick.
Right.
And we really are prioritizing being able to spend these funds because we don't know if these funds will be reappropriated by the legislature in future biennia. So that would be, determined by the application, reviewers as far as how responsive a project's timeline is to the RFA. And we cannot guarantee that funds will be available, beyond June 30th of 2025. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like for my specific project, probably the most viable application would just be architecture and engineering services, as that's something that could be completed for future work, but not already funded.
Correct.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense. That would be eligible. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Abby. And for everyone on the call, just want to do a quick time check here. I know we're getting close to that 1 o'clock time frame, and we'll certainly get to your questions as much as we can. For those that are in the Q&A, rest assured that we're going to go through those and answer them and then post them on the in the Q&A document on the website, and also when we send the follow-up email. If we don't get to those questions, not to worry, we will get those out to you as well. We did have some more hands come up, so I'm going to go right into it. M. Arndt.
Yeah, I work with a lot of condominium complexes and associations and such. Will they be able to apply for this as tier 1 if they're a larger building? And would the benchmarking and auditing, O&M, and all that kind of stuff be considered part of the scope?
Yeah, as a building is eligible and is required to comply with the standard, and as a project addresses compliance with the standard, that would be an eligible application.
Okay, and then what if they apply for the early adopter incentive program at the same time?
Yeah, there are no restrictions between the two, between applying for this and applying for the incentive.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Christine, good afternoon.
Hello, thank you. Regarding the supplement or the supplementation, if we have in the budget to repair, a piece of equipment or equipment that will help with energy efficiency, yet if we receive the grant funding, we would be able to do a complete replacement. How would that be viewed? Would we want to then apply for funding for the difference between the actual full replacement compared to what we have in the budget for repairs? Or would we be able to apply for the full cost of the full replacement, since that full project wouldn't already have designated funding in the budget?
I would say that an application to replace what is already budgeted would be ineligible. Beyond that, it's hard. It's difficult to say if the funds have been set aside for one specific project. An application could not be. An application would be ineligible to replace those funds within that specific project.
So if we have budgeted to do repairs, but if we have the full funding, we would be able to, they're basically RTUs for a building. They're desperately in need of repairs. We can only afford right now to budget for the repairs. But if we received the funding, we would be able to do a full replacement of those RTUs. So could we apply for the full funding for the full project? Or would we maybe apply for the difference between what it would be to do the replacement of the RTUs, the difference between what we have budgeted for the repairs, which would not be needed if we are able to completely replace the RTUs for better energy efficiency? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, and that would be up to you how you are determining those. If you are considering, an application to this grant program as a separate project, or are you looking at the application to this program as replacing those funds for this project that you are currently pursuing? If you are looking at it to replace the funds which you currently have identified for this specific project, then I don't think that would be an eligible application. But if you have a separate project which you are pursuing for these grant funds, then that would be eligible to pursue. I don't know that would necessarily be supplantation, as it would be a different project.
Okay, so we could consider replacing the RTUs a completely separate project from what we have budgeted for repairs.
I can't necessarily make that determination.
Okay.
But for the application's sake, if you are, the funds are not intended to replace funds which have already been budgeted for a specific portion of a project. If these funds allow for a different project, then that application in general would be eligible. And I don't think that would be considered supplantation.
Great, thank you.
All right. Derek, we've got two additional hands up, so I'd like to go to Jack and then Michael before we close out, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, you bet. Jack, go ahead.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. Thank you. I guess my question is specific to your extension of the project. We're kind of in a critical stage with a couple clients where it really helped them with this clean building performance. And it's right ripe with this grant. But at the same time, we're also doing a performance contract where we've designed and going to be developing this, or not designed and developed, it's already designed. Now we're going to run into construction, and we have a guarantee already, on the scoping of things. With that, there's some scopes that are pretty sure that we're going to go past probably into the July timeframe. And so if we're already providing a guarantee on the scope and the costing and nothing's changing, does that put us at a higher level for being able to get an extension?
The extensions are more related to if funds are reappropriated by the legislature in future sessions. This funding will end June 30th, 2025. If the legislature reappropriates this funding, we are then generally able to take that funding and apply it to previously approved contracts. But there is no guarantee that any of those things will happen.
Okay, so I guess to help the client, it's more on the lines of if you're guaranteeing the scope and the cost, and you're only going to be extending that to the installation of what you already purchased for equipment, we would be invoicing, or we'd like to invoice by that 30th, to be done. However, because of the ordering equipment has longer lead equipment impacting, there would be no additional cost other than what we already provided in the actual performance guarantee. So we wouldn't be asking for more funding per se. We would just be billing for that only to do the install or finish the install in July. So
yeah, all of the activities would need to take place within the period of performance. So, an invoice, we can't prepay for things to happen. Kind of
Okay.
as
right.
I understand what you were just describing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Michael, thanks for your patience.
And thanks for all the information, you guys. And I don't mean to beat a dead horse here, but on the supplantation of funds, just so I'm understanding it right. So we have budgeted, we've been working on this for years, but we have budgeted for the upgrades at our convention center. We had budgeted like 400,000, and then when all the bids came in, it ended up being $100,000 plus there's some other funds for paperwork that we need to do. And we did go to our board last fall to ask for $400,000. So that extra 100,000 or more that it's going to cost us. So essentially that's not funded. Would any of this grant money be able to be used for any of these overages?
I mean, if there have not been specific funds within the budget that have been allocated to an eligible project, then, that would be, as it relates to compliance with an eligible building, that would be an eligible application.
Man, I don't want to speak out of school, but what it kind of seems like is that all of us who budgeted for everything and we're way ahead of the curve, it's like we're kind of getting penalized and not going to be able to get any of these funds since we were ahead and we budgeted for everything.
Yeah, I understand, the frustration. We're working with how to get these funds out to folks that need to comply with the standard. We recognize that it's not going to align, with everybody's timeline. And, we will continue to advocate for building owners and their needs for funding programs like this. But these are the limitations that we work with when we do grant programs like this. So, you know, I recognize your frustration, and you know, we recognize that it's not going to fit everyone's timeline. Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
I recognize your frustration. I'm sorry about that.
No, I get it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we were well over time. Appreciate everyone hanging with us. And I know there are many more questions in the Q&A. Again, as I mentioned, we will compile those and answer them. Put the answers to them. Many of them Derek was able to answer through the live questions, but we'll get those over to you. Any questions that come up since in regards to this Clean Buildings Performance Grants, we certainly encourage you to email those. I just put the email address in the website or in the chat again. And then for the compliance questions, please send those to the buildings@commerce.wa.gov email. Our tech team is eager to answer those for you as well. So Derek, I will let you go ahead and close this out with our final thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, folks. We really appreciate your time, both here participating and the time that y'all are putting in with the applications. Sorry we weren't able to get to everybody's questions today. We are a few minutes over, but again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to us at the email cbpsgrants@commerce.wa.gov. We will get those responses posted as soon as we can. And then again, reminder, applications are due January 30th, 2025 by 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Thanks again to everyone, and please have a great rest of your day.